This video picks up where we left off from the last one. The last video was the first GUI video that actually showed how you created a GUI project, you did a JFrame, and then you added a panel on it, and for both the panel and the JFrame you right mouse clicked on them and changed the layout to be absolute, and then you dropped a button on the panel, changed its name, changed its text, and you did that by either right mouse clicking on it, changing edit text, change variable name, and then also add an event handler for the mouse clicked. And on that event handler you simply just said exit the program. So let's pick up from there and take a look at some of the other objects we have that we can work with. The first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to make this panel a little bit bigger, move my button maybe over in the corner, and I'm going to drop a label object on there. So I'm going to drop that label, I'll put it right there. First thing you could do if you wanted was change its name, and you could do so by right mouse clicking, change variable name. You can also change the text that's in there. You can do it by right mouse clicking, edit text, or you could come over to your properties window, find text, and you could change the label there. So I'm going to change that label and I'm going to say enter username : that now changes the text, and I'm going to also change the foreground color by clicking on the ellipsis. I'll change it to white. So I've now got white on a blue background. You can even change the font if you want to. You can click on the ellipsis for font and say I want it to be bold and I want it to be 12 characters. So just by changing the attributes, it actually automatically affects how the label looks on the screen. Next thing I can do is I can drop an edit on there. The edit, or the text field, allows us to enter data and interact with the user. First thing I want to do is change the variable name. Right mouse click, change variable name. I'm going to call this txt user name. When you give variables names or objects names, make sure that you're naming something that's descriptive of what they're doing. Next thing, if I change this text, let's say I wanted to wipe out the text, I could choose edit text and delete all the text that's inside of it. Press enter. Notice what happens. It automatically resizes that text area. You can just use your arrows and resize the box again if you wanted to. Now the nice thing about object-oriented programming languages is that if you learn one object really well, then you pretty much have learned a lot of the next object, and that's because all the objects inherit from base objects. And if you take a look at this text field property, we'll see it has the same things that the label had, like background, font, foreground, the text. Here's something that's different though: editable. This specifies whether or not you can edit that text. Maybe you want it to be a read-only text field, so you could uncheck that. Another thing that's interesting is this one. It's called a Tooltip Text. In fact, you're actually seeing a Tooltip Text show up right now. When you put your cursor over something, it pops up a little box and it tries to describe what you're doing. Tooltip Text, it says the text to display in a tooltip. Another word for tooltip text is hint. So I'm going to type something here and I'll say this is where you type your username. And that might seem pretty straightforward, but anything you can do to help the user understand what they need to do is going to make them feel better about running the program. I could do the same thing on this button. The button has a tooltip text. I could change that to say click here to close the program. Now let me go ahead and run the program and let's see what happens with tooltip text. When you put your cursor over the close button, click here to close the program. Put your cursor over the edit, this is where you type your username. Those are things that can help the user feel more comfortable about using your program. An important thing to understand about both the label object, the jLabel, and the jTextField is that they have many attributes that allow you to define how they look and how they work. For instance, back on this jTextField, we have different attributes such as whether or not that field should be enabled. You can make it enabled or unenabled or non-enabled. Focusable. Focus says that when you press your tab key, should the tab go to that field when it's its turn. We can turn that off or on. Let's see what happens if I say enabled and I go ahead and click run. What does that do for me? Notice that I cannot type anything in there anymore. Maybe there's certain fields you don't want to enable until the end user needs to get there. All you'd have to do is in your source code then control whether or not that field is enabled. Now, how could you do that? Well, let's go ahead and we'll just drop a button on there for fun, and we'll change the text of this to be enable edits. That'll be the name of the field. And let's go ahead and change the variable name for that button. We'll call it btn enable. And then if you ever click on this, we want to enable this edit field. Remember that edit field's name was txt username. Now that I've got a button on there, let's go ahead and add an event to it that says if you ever click on that button, let's enable the text field. How do we do that? Well, here we go to the button. We could right mouse click, go to events, mouse clicked. In the mouse clicked event, it says if you click on the button, what do we want to do? Well, we want to make the txt username jTextField set enabled. Now, I do want to back up and show you something. Notice that there is an enable attribute, but there's a line through it. Anytime you see a line going through something like that, that means it's deprecated, meaning don't use it anymore. And it says it's replaced by set enabled, and you pass it a Boolean value. So instead, we want to say set enabled, and we just want to pass it a true. Now let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. I run it. I'll click on enable edits. Look, I can now edit it. But the interesting thing, my mouse cursor is not showing up there. If I click on it, it will show up. But maybe when I click on this, I want the mouse cursor to automatically go into that box. How would we do that? Right here, in that same method, we could say not only do we want to enable it, but we want to go ahead and do something called request focus. Focus says put that component into the forefront of the screen, or in other words, let the user interact with that component. So by saying the text field.request focus, let's see what happens when we do that enable edit buttons. Now the cursor is right there and I can start typing.